My family was quite poor. I was the youngest of my siblings. I don't remember how the 7 of them even looked like, and I hardly spoke to anyone. I could probably count the number of times I spoke with my fingers. I didn't have a close connection with my parents or siblings, and I did exactly what I wanted, what I thought was fun, and what I enjoyed. I guess you could call me a terrible kid, because I detested school, and I would often skip school to watch Hyoten. It was the only thing I genuinely looked forward to. Nothing else was truly important to me. I only knew that I wanted to draw. That's all I wanted. I wanted to become a children's author. Ever since I was born, that's the only thing I wanted to do. I drew and traced Ape Man again and again, over and over, and finally, I was able to teach myself how to draw and paint. So I did just that. I drew and painted and created. I created so many wonderful things. This was my sense of freedom. My freedom It was the only joy I had, and school was such an issue, so I finally decided to leave my home, and I began living on my own. I didn't have a lot of money, so I stole and stole, and because of this, I spent 2 weeks in jail. I finally landed a rather solid job. It only took me 29 other odd jobs to find this one, and when I eventually chose to submit my work to Shonen Jump, they denied me, saying it was too graphic and I should try again some other time. How could they reject me? Too graphic? Are you serious? Do they think I'm just a sex and violence author? I was outraged, and I created so much more work, more violent, more grotesque, more frightening, more and more out of spite. And finally, I was able to participate in Ribon no Kishi, but it honestly went undetected. That was my debut, and no one ever mentions it. Still, it was a start. 2 years later, I was able to debut my first standalone manga, which I named Wait. Okay, we are not doing this. We can't just jump straight into it because this author is pretty extreme, and I mean very extreme. Maruo is one of the best retro artists in the manga industry, and he is simply not another sex and violence author. He uses imaginative page design and produces really stunning art. And I can't deny that his art is really lovely in some ways, but I have a little bit of affection for him because, well, I'll explain that later. And nowadays, I believe that the majority of readers who read his work will either leave his books with a memory of bizarre and sometimes masterfully depicted violence, or they'll just end up throwing up profusely. I actually had a hard time making this video because of the extreme violence I'm mentioning. To simplify it, Maruo Suehiro is a Japanese Ero-guro mangaka. Now, if you don't know what that means, it means erotic and grotesque. I'm going to be completely honest with each and every one of you. Before I go any further, I want you to know that I have somewhat of a complicated relationship with Ero-guro. There's only a couple of exceptions and authors that I really enjoy, and I'm not going to sugarcoat it and attempt to disguise the fact that Maruo actually crafts some of the most disturbing and horrifying pieces of art I've ever seen. And I mean horrifying as in disgusting and disturbing and unsettling rather than just scary. This is a warning. To me, it all depends on how it is presented. That's my opinion. I can manage it better if it's charming and strange than if it's depicted in much more of a realistic way. A perfect example is Shintaro Kago. Now, I may be contradicting myself here, but I am a bit of a twisted person. I feel that curiosity, and I felt that it drawn me into reading his work, mainly because of how everyone talks about him. His art is what attracts people, and it's also what drew me in. It's how he samples not just the Showa era of Japan, but also German expressionism and modernized art, even though he hates it. And from what I've seen is that it held a mirror up to periods and events that most people would prefer to forget, and that's something I can respect. Ero-guro is not for everyone, and while I'm at a crossroads, I believe it is a fantastic way to study and experience the darkest aspects of mankind and humanity. The majority of Maruo Suehiro's stories involve children, and these children are the focus of his more serious work, which makes me feel sad and conflicted even though I adore his art style. And I know that could be unsettling and a turning point to many of you guys watching this video, and that's fine. I don't actively seek for Ero-guro manga. I do understand that it is a necessary component of my interest in horror manga and art, so I accept it for what it is, and I almost appreciate how it makes me feel. Besides just trying to make a living out of his talents, Maruo is actually self-taught, in contrast to many other artists. In his art, there's an obvious connection to the Showa period and 1920s and 30s Japan. This is where many of his works are set, and it is reflected in his vintage style. One thing I've noticed regarding Ero-guro is that despite the fact that we all know in our hearts that these stories may occur and are never discussed or seen, some of them only ever involve murder, abuse, and desire. They never seem sincere or true, almost like an exaggeration of how deprived humans can be. Until I stumbled across a case that happened to be a huge influence on Ero-guro. A case that, believe it or not, actually makes you think about your significant other. A case that makes people question their own morals and thoughts. A case that literally makes people think that there was no harm done. She may have killed someone and defiled the corpse, but is there really any criminal element at play here? I see it as pure love, and in a sense, rather sweet. What the actual Sada Abe was spoiled by her mother, who encouraged her to be independent and free-spirited. She was born in 1905 into a wealthy Tokyo household. When she was 15 years old, she was sexually abused, and after this incident, she was never the same, even though her parents helped her through the entire process. When she started to grow more malicious, her father sold her to a geisha house in Yokohama. But family members would later argue the reason. Everyone had an alternative story. Sada claimed that she was being punished for her careless behavior, while her sister would argue that she had been more than willing. Being a successful geisha was considered a mark of distinction for Japanese women at the time, and Sada had often expressed her wish to live this life. Now, if you don't know what a geisha is, it is a Japanese performer and entertainer who focuses on traditional Japanese art and culture. Whatever Sada had imagined about the luxury life of geisha, the reality was much different. After catching syphilis from a customer, she turned to prostitution and began working in Osaka's brothels. Working as a licensed prostitute presented more challenges than she was prepared to face, and this is where she gradually gravitated into unlicensed prostitution. After both of her parents died, she became even more unconstrained. As time passed, she was followed by a string of other partners as she attempted to break free from prostitution completely. Sada eventually became an apprentice in a restaurant in 1936, hoping to start over. This is how she met Schizo Ishida. Although he owned the Yoshidaya restaurant where Sada worked, his wife actually managed it. Ishida was a 42-year-old man who was occasionally a playboy and had become dissatisfied with his marriage, and this is where he saw his new trainee. Even though Sada was already seeing Omiya at the time, she didn't think twice when the handsome Ishida came up to her. In her own words, she stated, "I never met such a sexy man." She was against being his mistress and was enraged at the thought of sharing him with anybody else. She wanted to be his wife. Many others believed it was her first time falling in love, and that's not that crazy to say. As Ishida moved away from her, Sada became increasingly depressed and started drinking excessively. Then, after seeing a performance in which a geisha used a knife to scare a lover, Sada purchased a big kitchen knife and used it to threaten Ishida at their next date. You would think that after hearing this, he would run away or call the police, but instead, Ishida got turned on and took her to an inn in the Ogu red light area. You can probably guess what they did here. Everything I say from here on is based on Sada's testimony, so I don't know if it's true or not. After 2 days of making love, she removed her kimono's albi and began strangling him. He told her to do it while he slept because he enjoyed it. Then, on the morning of May 18th, she ended up strangling him to death. After several hours of lying with a dead body, she took a kitchen knife and removed his genitals. She then wrapped them up in a magazine cover and used his blood to write Sada and Kichi on his left leg and on a bedsheet. She then carved her name on his left arm, dressed, and exited the room. Sada then told the staff not to bother Ishida and left the inn. After a while, a maid discovered the disfigured body, and then the search for Sada Abe started. When she was finally apprehended and questioned by the police, they found out that she was oddly enticing when she discussed killing Ishida. In her own words, she stated, "I loved him so much, I wanted him all to myself. However, since we were not husband and wife, other women may have embraced him as long as he lived. I killed him because I knew that no other woman could ever touch him again." And when she was questioned why she had severed his genitalia, this is what she responded with: "Because I couldn't take his head or body with me. I wanted to take the part of him that brought back to me the most vivid memories." Now, there was one more event or era that Maruo loves to reference or sample, and that was the Showa period. He also likes to reference or sample German expressionism or art, but I'll talk about that later on in this video. This is where many of his works are set, and I guess this is the part where I go into a little bit more detail that could be wrong or could not, depending on if there's any people out there who, studied abroad or want to correct me. The Showa era was named after the longest reigning Japanese emperor, Emperor Showa. The Showa period of Japanese history corresponds to the reigning of the Showa emperor. He ruled from December 25th, 1926 to January 7th, 1989. Prior to 1945, Japan embraced political dictatorship, extremism, and fascism. A lot of you must recall that this was a period of war and bloodshed when everyone on the planet was suffering. When America bombed Japan on August 6, 1954, many Japanese artists were influenced by or even joined the Japan Communist Party, and as a result, socialist realism, which portrayed the misery of the poor and the nobility of the working class, was the most popular art form in the immediate post-war period. Many Japanese artists grew more and more dissatisfied with the Communist Party's strict and constrained definition of art during the 1950s. However, artists found it very difficult to even display their work unless they followed the party's rules, because Communist Party members and allies continued to have a dominant position in the top levels of artistic association and exhibition committees, until a hero came and saved everyone. Godzilla stood in for the anxiety that many Japanese people had regarding the potential for a repeat of the atomic bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. However, Godzilla also serves as a reminder that we must accept, adjust to, and coexist with forces that are larger than ourselves. In the face of these pressures, we must, if at all possible, figure out how to promote peace. Everything that he represents, typhoon, earthquakes, volcanoes, and nuclear weapons, are all real. And this is honestly one of my favorite Showa era art pieces. If you can consider Godzilla an art piece, I'm pretty sure you guys can. How did we get here? Oh yeah, Maruo. All of this played a role for his search in artistic freedom. Maruo depicts the worst things you can imagine. Nightmare-inducing things, sexual intoxication, death, decay, disability, deformity, and the use of surrealism. His works also contain political, religious, supernatural, and historical themes. Suehiro's interest in Ero-guro is a result of his notion of freedom of expression, the use of absurdity and nonsense, and the lack of morality and justice. And because of this, he is considered as one of the greatest retro artists of our time. Okay, so if you haven't left the video, now let's get into his first ever standalone manga. The English title for this manga is called Okay, so here I am. Yes, I use manga decks. But yeah, I wanted to this is before I read this manga. I know it's an anthology and this is his first ever official work. And just looking at the names, I can see that this is already a great start. My stomach hurts. And I'm not saying that to be dramatic at all. I just don't know what I read. I know some of you may say I'm a baby or being over dramatic, but I'm not lying when I say this. I don't think he's normal. I don't think he's a genius or extraordinary in storytelling as of right now. He just makes some very twisted and terrible stuff. Like, this is nothing more than 13 stories, and his goal for each one is trying to put as much gore and as much fetishes as he can into just one manga. Why did someone create this? What's with the licking, the eyeballs, and the mutilation? Like, who gets the idea to be like, okay, I'll make a character with no foot and then make him use it as a goddamn... Alright, so I decided to take a little break, but now that I regained my composure, I think I can talk about this manga. Since this manga is Maruo's first manga, I see that he doesn't really hold anything back. This manga is extreme, and I don't really want to, but I'll try to analyze this violent mess. The characters in these stories either play a role of an abuser or an exploitable object of desire. And I believe that the main goal seems to be to illustrate where desire can lead people. It leads them into some really messed up situations. I understand that these characters are all succumbing to their desire regardless of how weird or revolting they are. There isn't any limits or any morals, really. The characters in these stories are tortured, stabbed, maimed, beaten, killed, and cheated on, but it isn't just that. We see a reversal, in which some of the characters who appear to be the victims end up becoming the abusers, and everyone just ends up abusing themselves. It's almost as if they want it to happen, and I have no idea if that makes sense. I don't know if my analysis of this I don't even know. I wrote it and I don't know. It's almost as if this manga wants you to be complicit in its depravity. You feel like a guilty bystander. You really only have two options when reading this manga. Either you read on and give in to their moral and literal filth and become a bystander, or you quit reading the manga and just flee in horror to avoid this monstrosity. And there's even a remake of The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. Just like his debut manga, this is again an anthology, and I feel like the only thing that really saved me was this Ashita no Joe reference. Look, I love the obscuredness of Suehiro's Maruo's artwork. The first chapter makes it very clear and tells you what I mean. I love his artwork whenever it doesn't include repulsive, disgusting things. The good news is that this artwork doesn't really include any of that. The art heavily references his influences from the 1910s to 1930s. And are really excellent and intriguing. The first story pays reference to artistic movement like Surrealism and German Expressionism, and filled with a ton of grotesque and violent things, and a lot of that. And I mean a lot. Like, there's a lot of poop in this manga. Again, this is another anthology. Okay, let me regain and gather my thoughts. So for any of you that want more information on Maruo and what kind of person he is, all of you that think that I'm exaggerating about this guy, I'm not. These are words that he wrote himself. During my boyhood, I once happened to taste some. Of course, it was my own. The French author Jean Genet writes, "Filth abhors filth. Genius. When I was a child and I wanted to, I went home. Even if I was playing at a neighbor's house. Even now, I can't do it at a station toilet or a park toilet. Anyway, about the taste of that, it's actually more bitter than foul smelling. If you think I'm lying, try it for yourself. Maruo." I can't believe it, and I can't believe I'm going to do this, so let's all read chapter 2 together.
Mommy, I met a stranger the other day in the girls' school toilet. The man wasn't surprised to see me and left. Mommy, there are some very strange people in this world. As for me, I had no will to live. I had no guts to do things. What's this? I don't know why there's a man's uniform in the girls' toilet, but I put it on, and after a while, I went into town. It looks smart, doesn't it? This town reeks like a bloody slaughterhouse, but that's no concern of mine. I found some money in one of the pockets, so I decided to go to the cinema. The sun is setting, I must go home.
If you were enjoying the story, you're a weirdo, and too bad, because I literally can't show anything else that happened after this. This is his most famous and most popular manga on the list, and not for a good reason. I'll give a brief backstory of this work, and there are a billion other more in-depth and possibly more accurate videos on just this work alone, so check those out if you want to know more. Throughout the 1920s, the Camellia Girl, or Shoujo Tsubaki, was a typical protagonist that frequently appeared in Japanese street theater. Usually, the persona appeared as a young poor girl selling camellia flowers on the streets. This trope had been used by Suehiro Maruo in his first debut manga, Rose-Colored Monsters. Now, this manga was already extreme and bad enough, but then someone more insane, or possibly dare I say brave, decided to give it an anime adaptation. A adaptation that he paid for with his life savings and retirement funds. He directed, wrote the script, drew, and animated. Now reading this and finding this out made me have way more respect for him, and this man's name was Hiroshi Haruda. This guy is kind of cool. I mean, when I read this manga, the last thing I was thinking was, this would be 10 times better as an anime. Hey, but you animated some of the panels. That's not the same thing. This film was created over the period of 5 years and featured over 5,000 hand-drawn animation sheets. 5,000. It's obvious that the film's graphic content kept it from getting any sponsors. So when the movie was released in May 1992, it was honestly doing surprisingly well until 1994, when the Japanese Film Censor Board ordered 26 cuts and alterations. Then from 1994 to 2006, the film was only available in a highly censored version at cinemas and film festivals. The film premiered at the San Sebastian's Horror and Fantasy Film Festival in Spain in 1999, and the recordings were banned from domestic importation and screenings in Japan after being seized and destroyed by Japanese customs at Narita Airport on their arrival back home. And when I was researching more about Hiroshi, I found out that he actually has a YouTube channel. Can you believe that? Like, I'm not making that up. When I found this out, I decided to record it. Alright, so this is his channel. As you can see, he says we support Haruda's activity. Now, there's a lot of government or political videos, but let's see what he makes. Let's try this one. Can I? What the? Oh my goodness. Oh, what the heck? I'm just everywhere at this point. Let's talk about this manga finally. I have a whole new respect and view for this manga, and I believe I've been pretty biased towards Maruo, and so I will try my best to be fair. Midori is a sweet young orphan girl who's kidnapped and forced to work in a circus freak show. That's the basic premise. Reading this manga, I saw all kinds of horrific and disturbing things, but I continued reading. I read it for what it was, and then I reread it because I just couldn't help but realize that there was something more than just shock value. Now, I'm not saying there is no shock value, because it's definitely included. And just because I'm talking about this manga in greater depth doesn't imply it's any less harsh or extreme. There are really strong triggers here that can genuinely cause discomfort or pain, and I don't want to say anything because spoilers, and I actually just don't want you guys to read it. Midori goes through a lot of agony and pain. This story transcends all boundaries. I feel like he isn't just telling a story of a young girl in the circus who is being abused. I believe he is creating a story about our culture and how bad things truly are. He emphasizes that while society might be fun, there are always negative aspects to consider, like this freak show circus. It appears fun and crazy on the surface, but in truth, the showmen and managers abuse these performers to profit from their disabilities. This story could also be a message of Japan's over-sexualization and mistreatment of young girls, or it could simply be a sorrowful look at Midori's horrific life. The story of Shoujo Tsubaki is a powerful depiction of the harshness and vileness of life. with numerous interpretations. This manga depicts the worst aspects of human nature, allowing us to reflect on them. It's a look of how far a human can go when there isn't much left in life. This narrative does not promote or attempt to defend these views, rather it shines a light on the severe darkness that exists in human nature. Now, if there really is a main lesson, it was sadly ignored and hidden beneath the immense brutality. Reading and watching this movie, everyone overlooks the essential meaning behind the story. Maruo always has a purpose. It is kinda hard to see it, and sometimes he just makes disgusting stories because he wants to, but I believe this story is different. And when he wants, his works are thoughtfully planned and executed, and they are artistic, meaningful, and thoughtful. Although it is not for everyone, I believe that this story is essential for presenting this viewpoint. Another anthology. In this, he shows his love for German expressionism, and even includes a picture from a film that inspired him so much that he even included it in one of his previous stories, The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. And after I finished reading it, I just kept thinking, what is it with that movie that inspires him so much and made him want to even remake it? And I've heard of this film and seen it, but not like watched it. So I decided to watch it. I actually really enjoyed this film. There's a million other great videos on this movie that go really into depth, and those people know what they're talking about. So check those out and watch it. But I'll give a brief description. Let's say you and your friends go to a fortune teller and your friend decides to ask the fortune teller, "How long will I live?" And then the fortune teller tells him that he will die tonight. What do you think would be your reaction? There's like two options. You don't die and that makes him a fraud, or you do die and that means that he's actually a fortune teller. The truth is, you don't have any options and he gets to decide. I can definitely see the inspiration and motivation that this movie had on Maruo. Even me, I'm inspired and motivated by this movie, and it's honestly helped me make this video. Alright, I will finally talk about this manga. How many of you have Spotify? Good. Now how many of you have Apple Music? Okay, good. Now how many of you want to make love to either one of these apps? Yeah. You can probably guess what this one is. Yep, another anthology. This time it revolves around a boy whose father dies and he ends up hearing voices from his dead dad and his ancestors. They tell him to indulge and to give in to his deepest desires, and you can probably tell how that turned out. Okay, well, he finally did it. We got a full story and not an anthology. I'm pretty grateful because this is actually a really creative and cool idea. Inugamis are canine deities in Japanese mythology that take the form of dogs, but have the ability to possess humans. They typically exact revenge on behalf of their Inugami owner. The Inugami are incredibly strong and capable of living on their own, betraying their owners, and even taking human form. This story starts off with a boy trying to summon an Inugami because he hates his teacher, and his teacher finds out that the kid hates him and decides to do it to him, and he becomes a Shikigami. And no, this isn't a Bleach ripoff. This story is refreshing and doesn't really fall under Ero-guro, but it does have its lingering effect. But instead, Maruo shows off his brilliant illustration. He showcases his mature work style and experiments with mystical imagery. Visually, the outcome is pretty expressive. I noticed that the panels are rarely discarded and not just filler, if that makes sense. When getting to the 90s, Maruo experimented with more accessible works with larger general appeal. This was in contrast to his Ero-guro techniques of the previous decade, which is typically normal for this approach on manga. He was never really able to establish himself as a prominent personality in the mainstream, but he did have some success, and that's why I can see a major difference in his story. It's almost as if he wants to be known for more, not just Ero-guro, and I fairly enjoyed this one. Finally, all my whining paid off, and he finally made it a shonen, or attempted, because it only has 4 chapters, and it's about a mysterious boy who transfers to different schools to fight different monsters, and it's not horrible, but it's also not great. It kind of feels a bit cheesy and cliche, and very watered down from his other works. But the art and action and paneling really reminds me a lot of Astro Boy. I might be the only one that thinks that, and I think I might be the only person who has read this series. Again, he switches his genre, this time into a comedy, and I found it kind of funny and interesting. This manga is about a boy named Gichi Gichi who has magical powers, and he uses them against the bad kids in his class or bad people. This is just a huge and major shift from his other stories. Oh, look, it's Santa. Oh, Santa wants to talk to the kid. Santa has a gun. I know I was complaining or whining a lot earlier in the video, but this honestly feels out of place and weird. Like, I enjoyed it because I know who the author is and who's behind this manga, but if I didn't, then I wouldn't really read this series. But for some reason, I kinda liked this series. This isn't a lie, this is probably my favorite series from Maruo. Sure, it's rushed, sure, its plot isn't that great, and it might include John Wayne Gacy, but I genuinely think that this is some of his best work. This story demonstrates how people are kept in a state of unending suffering by the unimaginable, forbidden depths of human behavior. We fear and loathe the lack of hope and significance in our lives, the hopelessness of our drive to obtain what we want, and the fact that we can never have what we seek. We lash out as a result of these emotions, as well as the encouragement from society, which feeds our desires and results in suffering. Even when we are venting our suffering on ourselves or people around us, the drama of our battle in this cage is somehow both incredibly tragic and wonderful. This manga symbolizes being different and an outsider. I found the thought of being a vampire kind of appealing in the story. Despite her not being a vampire, Luna convinced herself and her sister that she is, and gets a tattoo on her leg. I interpreted this as a metaphor for a person becoming darker as they get older. You witness Luna overcome all obstacles and exact revenge on the people who harmed her. It still is very gruesome and terrible, and I thought that there wouldn't really be a lot of depth to the characters. That's what I initially thought, and in a way I'm kind of right. There is pointless violence and sex, but I also thought it added to the manga's overall atmosphere and tone. The manga is more about the illustration than it is about conveying a story. Because of the manga's overall gloomy and mysterious atmosphere, it makes me adore it. One by one, the characters in The Laughing Vampire come to understand this terrible reality of human existence, but life itself is the only thing they have to hate. Light is constantly somewhere else, somewhere we're locked out of, and it no longer exists in our reality. This manga was based on Itogawa Ranpo's novella with the same title. It depicts the narrative of an unknown author who would impersonate one of his successful colleagues in order to achieve his ambition. This is a very short and simple story, and it is very dreamlike and perhaps symbolic. It raises issues about human wickedness, and it is a very quick read. There is no eyeball licking or sucking or horrible bodily images, but there is a continual tension, whether it be the narrator's fear of being discovered or the contrast between the beautiful island and the schemes used to construct it. I sensed that Maruo leaned into the nasty and painful aspects of the original story. This manga feels more like a unique experience than just any other story. This is another adaptation by the same author, Edogawa Ranpo, and just like that, Maruo is back. The Caterpillar is this horrific psychosexual story of Lieutenant Tsunaga, a scarred and limbless World War I warrior who comes home to his young and beautiful wife. Tsunaga is initially greeted as a hero, but he is rapidly forgotten and rejected due to his injuries. Unable to communicate or care for himself, he is utterly dependent on his wife, who grows to despise him and torments him. This isn't a complete adaptation. It alternates between Maruo's desires to startle the reader and his attempts to depict a more complex story. This is honestly an excellent example of Ero-guro, from the story to the art. Yes, it may not be as convoluted as his previous stories or others, but this is fundamentally what Ero-guro is. Alright, he is back again with another anthology and another adaptation, kind of. Although this one is a bit more symbolic than any of his other works, I genuinely liked it. And chapter 3, titled The Temptation of Saint Anthony, is my favorite, for obvious reasons. This is a fairly well-known story, perhaps you heard of it, or perhaps you haven't. But it doesn't matter because I'm here to explain it, and since I'm an art historian, I am clearly lying. During the 300s, Saint Anthony lived in a cave in the Egyptian desert, and hardly ever left it. Legend has it that the devil challenged his belief in God there. In order to divert his attention from his prayers, the devil brought seductive ladies and demons to beat him, but Saint Anthony never faltered. Now Maruo depicts this story in his own way, and even draws his own interpretation of the story, and even remakes a painting. I want to show you guys his 5 favorite depictions of the temptation of Saint Anthony. I won't go into much detail or examination. Again, I'm lying. In 5th place is Felician Rop. There isn't really much to explain or to describe. It's pretty in your face. As you can clearly see, he is showing the temptations of lust. His 4th is Salvador Dali, and this is probably my favorite. When you see St. Anthony holding a cross high in the air, the first thing you see is the horse jumping back. One could argue that this is a symbol of power and strength, something a saint shouldn't desire. With the naked woman on top of the golden cup, a row of elephants behind the horse all have long stretched legs that might symbolize passion and lust. Finally, a Renaissance-style structure that could possibly indicate material wealth and greed. Now, most of you guys know that in the Bible, the 10 Commandments forbid all these things, and this painting depicts them as the devil's temptations. In 3rd place is Max Ernst. Maruo has been a longtime follower of Max Ernst and finds him to be a great inspiration. In his depiction, he really goes into focus on Saint Anthony going through the cycle of torment and temptation. His 2nd is by Hieronymus Bosch. Bosch. Of the 5, I believe that this is the most creative. The most prevalent and important theme in Bosch's work is exhibited in this triptych. It shows the temptation and loneliness of the righteous man in the face of evil and the demonic that rules the world, either directly or through the hybrids and monstrous forms. And number 1 is Matthias Grunwald. In his favorite and last depiction, Saint Anthony is shown as an elderly man dressed in a monastic garb, while he is being violently attacked by a variety of demon creatures who represent his temptations. These grotesquely created figures represent the saint's spiritual agony and difficulties. Saint Anthony is depicted in the midst of the mayhem with a look of sorrow and fortitude, falling yet reaching for something that may symbolize his unshakable faith despite the physical suffering. Now, I believe that this is a parallel universe of Shoujo Tsubaki, and it deals with twins being sold to a freak show because their mother didn't want them. But it's honestly more peaceful, and everybody who works at this freak show are actually kind-hearted people, except for the boss who has a lazy eye. Also, I should mention that this manga has a lot of deformities and disabilities and all that. And I don't know if this is true, but there's a thing called boxed children. This is where a child is placed into a box and it restricts its growth and creates deformation. That way it can be used for a freak show. And this supposedly originated in China, but this isn't the only thing that I got from this story. This world he creates within the story feels alive, and well, even though it's honestly feels like a terrible place to live, it feels authentic. I don't go to the next page and get a cliche story or a repetitive plot, which is awesome. I think everyone should give the story a read or a chance, but there's still a lot of gross stuff in it, deformities and harsh things. Not saying that that's gross, but he makes it gross. I never imagined that I can comprehend Ero-guro or Maruo. From the idea, to the script, to the reading, to the research, I was a bit skeptical about the entire process. But as I went along, I came to the conclusion that I'm happy that I created this video. This is the man that launched Ero-guro into the mainstream and remains one of the most influential modern artists. Ero-guro will remain the outlet for the collective unconscious repressed desires. And that's the thing. There will be no more limits. It will be a race to see who can create the rudest, most disturbing image, from corruption to violence. It will be at the center of every story, every image, every narrative. We witness mutilation, bleeding heads, surreal transformations in which people become disgusting animals. Here I go with all the rambling. In other words, we will never stop being victims of our own mind. Whatever dark or terrible situation you are thinking of, it never really escapes the center of your psyche. This kind of art's narrative elements and unease creates an exhilarating experience. Therefore, I believe that Ero-guro is a form of escaping and coping for people. With this art, it explores the depths of personal pain, to question prevailing norms, and to dig into political worries. Many artists and individuals would not have a way to express their social concerns or social challenges if Ero-guro didn't exist. I guess they would just end up killing people. Thanks for watching. If you made it this far, I'm grateful, and you should subscribe. I'm being serious. You should.